Hello, and welcome to the Inside Social Work podcast, where we take a peek behind the scenes into different fields of social work, engage and inspire practitioners, translate research into practice, and encourage lifelong learning. I'm your host, Marie Vakakis. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. Welcome to episode 16 of the Inside Social Work podcast. I'm talking with Dr. Kylie King, a research fellow at the Centre for Mental Health at the University of Melbourne. Welcome to the podcast, Kylie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Marie.
Did you want to give the listeners a little bit of a background about who you are and what you're doing and the things you're putting out into the world?
Yep, sure. So, I started my professional life as a psychologist and worked with clients in a community setting, in a private setting for a few years. And then, like I said, I became more interested in the social drivers, the bigger social drivers for mental health. And so I moved into a research role in the centre. A lot of our research is quite applied and looking at making impacts on a population-wide level. So my recent work has focused on suicide prevention, and in particular suicide prevention with men, and looking at the influence on sort of social drivers like masculinity.
It's such a topical conversation at the moment and really getting a lot of, more awareness in the public space.
Yeah, I think so. I thought it was just me because I work in this area, and so then you see it. But yeah, it seems to be that there's more and more interest in this area, which is really great to see.
But I guess I feel like I'm like, is it that I'm actively seeking out that information more, or is the discourse changing? But I really feel like it is.
Yeah, I think that it is too, and there seems to be a lot more sort of willingness to think of it as the broader issue and a social issue, and thinking about those aspects of masculinity that might be influencing. That feels like a bit of a newer conversation, which I think is really interesting.
So what's some of the data showing around mental health, suicide prevention, and men's mental health? What's happening in that space?
Well, for quite some time in Australia, we know that men account for about 75% of the deaths by suicide every year, and that trend has been around for a while. And within that group, men aged over 85 have the highest rate, followed by men in those middle years. So that's been something that we've been grappling with for a while, and there's a range of ideas about why that might be the case. And I suppose what I've been interested in lately is the role of men's help seeking for mental health and suicide concerns, and the role that plays, and also the impact of masculinity, and by that I mean that conformity to the masculine norms that we have in society, so the rules that govern the way men should behave, and how that affects their mental health and their suicidal thoughts and feelings and their help seeking for those things.
So one thing that throws people is, so older men, you said over 80 or 85 have the highest rate of suicide, but it's actually the leading cause of death for men under 45.
Yes, that's right.
So for those who aren't familiar with the statistics and the data, I think that message can get confusing. Can you explain to people how that works when they hear it's a leading cause of death, but we have more men over a certain age?
Well, I suppose we talk about the suicide rate as opposed to the total numbers that are dying by suicide. So when we talk about the suicide rate, it's the rate per 100,000 people. So the rate at which suicide occurs per 100,000 people, and that rate is highest amongst men who are older. But when we look at the total numbers of men that die by suicide, the numbers are higher for younger men. And that's because obviously there are more younger men than older men, but also because older men also die from other causes as well. So, and they become obviously more prevalent as you get older. But for younger people, when those other causes of death, this all sounds a bit morbid, doesn't it? But when those other causes of death aren't as highly prevalent, then suicide is the leading cause of death. So there's the highest numbers of men in those age groups that are dying by suicide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know the figures were kind of, especially for younger men, almost kind of on par, or there's a bit of a trend with road traffic accidents. So we've seen a lot of effort. We use that as an example when I run mental health first aid around. We've seen a lot of public policy and a lot of things go into reducing the road toll. So
Yes.
that's kind of raised death by suicide as one of the leading causes of death for that age group as well.
Yeah, it's quite alarming. And there was a recent report too, also by Beyond Blue, that looked at ambulance attendances for suicidal, attempts and behaviours. And there was quite high numbers there of ambulance attendances for men as well, which suggests to us that there might be actually a lot more suicidal behaviour happening that we haven't previously been aware of.
So we know, there's quite a lot of also, I guess, the fatal and non-fatal attempts. So what's some of the language that people should be aware of when talking about suicide? I won't go into that too much so we don't have one of those dark and gloomy episodes. But when talking about suicide, what are some words that people shouldn't use, or what's kind of a little bit more palatable or acceptable to say?
Yes, well, I suppose the main one that comes to mind is people often say somebody committed suicide, and a lot of people prefer that we don't use that term these days because it has legal connotations like committing a crime or something like that. So people would prefer to say they died by suicide. Yep. And also we prefer not to use words like a successful suicide attempt because, again, it's not successful if you're dying. That's so again, just a fatal suicide attempt or a non-fatal suicide attempt. So it's just subtleties in language, but it can have a big impact, obviously, in how we view it and the impact it has on people.
So that's good for people to know, and I guess it's quite hard language to get your head around, and it can be quite confronting. So it's nice to hear, I guess, right off the bat, we've just started talking about it. So you kind of mentioned a bit of toxic masculinity and that kind of stoic self-reliance that kind of depicts poor help-seeking behaviour and a lot of stigma. So do you want to talk a little bit about your research, and then we'll get into one of the, I guess, a good news story of a program that's kind of targeting, challenging some of those stigmas?
Yeah, sure. I just lost you for a second there in the middle, so I hope I didn't lose much, but you wanted to know more about the sort of research around masculine norms and their impact?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me think where to start. So, yes, so as you're saying, there's quite a large body of evidence that tells us that conformity to those masculine norms like self-reliance and stoicism are negatively related with a range of mental health outcomes, including suicidal thinking, and also associated with like reduced help seeking and delayed help seeking. So a lot of previous research tells us that, and already, so there is some understanding of that. And then, as you said, we worked on a project called Man Up that looked at intervening, I suppose, or doing something about that, trying to understand it more and trying to see whether something could be done about that in using a media intervention.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that was going to be my next question. What is the Man Up? How did the project get started? Tell us all about it, because it's something I use in private practice a lot with with men to try and get them. I guess I'm clearly not a middle-aged man, so there's only so much perspective I can bring to that. So I find that's quite a helpful tool to get people hearing perspectives of other men. But for the audience listening, did you want to explain a little bit about what the Man Up project was and how I think Movember was involved in that? And
yeah, that's right. Well, there was already a group of investigators here, which I wasn't a part of, that were undertaking the 10 to Men study, which is a longitudinal study of male health in Australia. And out of that study came a concern, of course, for the high suicide rate amongst men and wanting to do something about it, realising that it's a gendered problem in lots of ways, because 3/4 of deaths, as we said, suicide deaths are by men. So my boss, Professor Jane Perkis, got together with a whole group of investigators and pitched the idea to Movember in one of their, they put a call out for proposals for funding. And so this idea of Man Up, a media-based intervention, a media-based suicide prevention intervention, was put forward to Movember, and Movember funded it. So we collaborated with an independent film company called Ares Films, and the Man Up documentary was created over about a year. So there was lots of consultation with various experts and men and people that worked with men, and the Man Up documentary was created. And so Man Up is a 3-part documentary of 1 hour each, and it was aired on the ABC in 2016 across 3 weeks. It's also been rescreened a couple of times, and it's still on iView and I believe Stan now. So the documentary looked at that sort of interplay between masculinity, suicide, help-seeking, mental health, trying to understand and unpack sort of the role of, what it means to be a man today in Australia and how that was impacting on some of those things. It was the main guy in the documentary was Gus Wallen, who's a Triple M personality in Sydney. So he sort of was the main guy, and he did a bit of a journey around Australia talking to different people about men's health and masculinity and suicide and trying to understand what was happening. He also, there was a lot of like everyday guys too talking about their own mental health, their own experiences with suicide, and talking about ways they'd manage that. So there was a lot of modelling of like positive, health behaviours and help seeking, and talking about how they'd overcome problems. And so, that was screened on the ABC. And then before that and after that, there was also a big social media campaign, so across Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr, which our film people managed, of course. And so that happened beforehand. And the idea of the social media campaign was obviously to spread the word about Man Up, but also to engage people and get people talking about the main ideas and, get some feedback and get conversations started. And then at the end of in the final hour of the documentary, Gus works on this campaign ad, which has the tagline of Man Up, Speak Up, and it has a series of guys, ranging from, a young baby to a man sort of, and it's saying, it takes, why do babies cry, why do we tell boys not to cry? And, silence can kill. And it's really moving. But the ad was distributed into the social media world at the end of the screening of Man Up, and it went viral and had over 50 million views.
Wow.
So it had a really big reach, so it was really exciting. And then at Melbourne Uni, so we contributed to providing like the evidence base around the documentary and worked with the film production company. And then we also did a big evaluation of Man Up.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. So that's one of the first times I've ever heard a documentary be involved in a randomised control trial.
Yes, well, we were really lucky because Movember, I suppose Jane here, the idea came from, an academic centre, I suppose, in collaboration with RS Films. And so Movember were very keen to have it evaluated and funded it to be evaluated. So we were in a really privileged position, I suppose, of being able to do an evaluation, and we were able to evaluate it before it was screened. So we're on board from the beginning in a collaboration that allowed us to plan a really rigorous evaluation of the documentary. And as far as I know, it is one of the only sort of rigorous evaluations of a documentary-based suicide prevention campaign that focuses on masculinity. So there are quite a lot of, there's a number of other documentaries similar to that are happening around the world. Like there's The Mask You Live In America, which I think a lot of people might have heard of or seen, and a few other ones, but none as far as I'm aware of have been evaluated, as we were fortunate to be able to do.
So what were some of the things you were hoping that the documentary would change, and how were you testing those?
Well, we were hoping that the documentary would obviously have an impact on people, and obviously it was designed as a suicide prevention intervention, but we know that we wouldn't be able to detect the impact on suicide rates straight away because those data take a long time to come out. And so we were interested in the impact on men's help-seeking behaviours and intentions, and also men's views of masculinity. So I suppose our hypothesis was that by focusing on masculinity, we could bring about a change to men's help-seeking, and that this would ultimately lead on to an improvement in men's mental health and wellbeing, and hopefully a reduction in suicide. So we did a randomised controlled trial, and I'm not sure if all your listeners would know what that was about, but basically it's about testing intervention in a controlled environment. So half of our participants, well, they didn't know they were in a study that was testing the impact on Man Up, so they didn't know that to start with, and then half the participants viewed our Man Up documentary, and half of our participants viewed another documentary. And then we assessed them all before they viewed the documentary and after they viewed the documentary on a set of measures. And this way, and they were randomly assigned to watch either the documentary or Man Up. And so in this way, they didn't know what they were being tested for, I guess, for want of a better word. And we didn't know either. So we didn't know which group participants were in. They didn't know which group they were in. And so by doing it that way, you can be reasonably confident that any changes that you see are because of the documentary that they've watched. So that way we could compare the two groups and see how they differed after watching their respective documentaries.
That's about as fun as I've heard statistics be explained. So.
Well, that's a great compliment.
So that it was. How many participants did you have? My memory is just under 400, but was it? Yeah.
Yes, it was 354 in the end. I think did all stages of the trial with us, and we had 169, if my memory's right, men who viewed the Man Up documentary, and what does that leave? One, can't do my maths that quickly. The rest watched the other documentary.
Yeah. And so what were some of the positive outcomes for that? So you measured immediately afterwards and then at intervals?
We measured immediately after they watched. So we did a set of measures before they watched the documentary. Immediately after, we asked them a brief set of questions just for their open-ended feedback about, what they thought about the documentary and, the bits they liked, the bits they didn't like. And then 4 weeks later, we emailed them out a survey, which was a repeat of the measures that we'd asked them at the beginning. So it was 4 weeks after viewing was when we sent those measures out again. And those set of measures that we asked were, there was a measure of likelihood to seek help. So their, let me word this right. So their likelihood that they would seek help if they had a personal or emotional problem, the likelihood that they would recommend that a male or female friend sought help. We also had a measure of conformity to masculine norms. That's what the scale's called. So it's questions related to various masculine norms of self-reliance and stoicism and others, and it assesses people's adherence or conformity to those norms, so the degree to which they agree with them, I guess. Then we also had a measure of social support and well-being and resilience and suicidality, so suicidal thoughts and behaviours.
And improvements across all the help-seeking and stigma reduction measures?
I forgot that bit. Yes, so we found significant increases in men who had watched the Man Up documentary. When we compared them to the men that wanted to watch the other documentary, we found that they had a significant increase in their reported likelihood of seeking help if they had a personal or emotional problem. They also had an increase in the likelihood that they would recommend that a male and female friend would seek help. And they also showed a small reduction in their conformity to masculine norms. So we were really excited to see that, because changes in masculinity had not been something that had been tested before and after an intervention. So that was really exciting to see. And obviously help seeking was the thing that we were trying to get at all along and was our primary outcome for the trial. So we were really excited to see that. That was a really significant finding. And then that was on the measures. And then we also had a whole bunch of open-ended questions that we asked where people could expand upon the impact that Man Up had had on themselves and their lives. And like I said, the things they liked, the things they didn't like. And we also found in that there was the men who watched Man Up talked a lot about increased awareness. So they were much more aware of suicide as a problem and the rates of suicide. And they were much more aware of sort of mental health issues. They reported much more awareness of other people's emotional lives, so what other people might be going through, and realising that, they weren't the only ones that might think those things sometimes. And also there was a strong desire for men to help others, so to both seek help for themselves and to help other people as well.
So that's a really positive outcome for a documentary.
We thought so. Yeah, it was. And the open-ended responses were really amazing and very moving. So it was all typed out and people provided really personal examples and information and insights into their changing thoughts and behaviours, and examples of when they'd sought help and examples of when they'd reached out to help other people. So I think the men were quite moved by the content, and it had brought about quite a lot of changes in attitudes that were leading on to some changes in behaviours as well.
It's such an exciting project to see develop so locally as well, and have that research component as well as a medium that's a little bit more accessible for people.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really exciting for us to be able to do an evaluation that had like a real world impact and outcome. So the ABC were also really interested in the evaluation. They were really keen to see what the impact of Man Up was, because we did it before the documentary was screened on television. So it meant that they could use some of our findings in their promotional materials for the show, which was really nice. So yeah, it was really good all round.
So what are some of the ways that mental health practitioners can use this tool? How would you suggest they integrate it into some of their work? What can they consider? What are some of the potential risks?
I think that's really interesting to think about. And I believe there has been some educational resources developed from Man Up that we could hunt down people that were interested. But I think in terms of working with clients, I think it just really raises, and like I've worked as a psychologist for myself in practice, and I don't think I'd fully sort of grasped the impact of sort of the pressures that men face to conform to sort of certain ways of thinking and behaviour. I hadn't fully grasped the impact on that for men, and also the strong pressure on men to sort of conceal what they were feeling inside, to the extreme point where they really didn't realise that other people were feeling the same way that they were. I don't think I'd fully grasp that. So even just from a personal level, I think watching Man Up as a practitioner is really informative. And I think I have heard of practitioners. One of the investigators on our evaluation was a psychologist who still works in practice, and she uses some of the Man Up material with her clients and gets her clients to go and watch Man Up. And she's found that really helpful for some of her people that she sees. But yeah, I think for practitioners, I think it's just a really great insight into the pressures that are on men in relation to their emotional lives, and maybe the importance perhaps of raising that with male clients in sessions. And also I really think that one of the big findings for me too was around that awareness raising, that I think that was really important and really valuable. So to let people understand that other people feel the way that they do, and that it's not uncommon, I think was a huge learning for the participants in our study. And I think that would be very meaningful for men to understand if they were seeking help, removing some of that stigma around it.
Yeah. So would you recommend that people give it a go, watch it, maybe watch it twice, once for just enjoyment and once to see how they would integrate that into their clients and what age groups they would potentially see it as being appropriate for?
Yeah, perhaps so, because there's quite a few different segments in the documentary. As I said, Gus sort of travels around and talks to different people, so it might be that different segments have different relevance to different people. So, and in terms of risks, I was just thinking about that then as you were talking too. I didn't mention that. There were a few participants in our studies that did report negative impacts of Man Up, which I think is important to acknowledge, because it is some heavy content. I guess we're talking about suicide and mental health, although a lot of our participants told us that it was presented in a light-hearted kind of humorous way that made it that kind of lightened a dark topic, I think one of our participants said. So I don't think viewers found it distressing or dark, but there were a couple of participants that did say that it sort of made them think about suicidal thoughts, or there were a couple of people that said they found it, that there was they might have found it a little bit overwhelming, wanting to make changes but not feeling able to. So it's worth acknowledging that, and that it would be important to talk that through with clients as well, I think. So I think to use it in a complementary way to work with clients would be great, to be able to talk through the different things that it raises. But generally it wasn't harmful overall, and we didn't have any recommendations out of the evaluation regarding that, other than just the importance of providing sources of support for people if they needed it.
And I guess if you're recommending it to a client, they're already interacting with you. So
Yeah.
they're already engaging in a bit of help. So how would you reach out to other men? Like I'm hoping that when I recommend it to people, they then watch it with someone, or it helps them start a conversation, or even reinforce a message that I've perhaps used in a session one-on-one, and just kind of helps them take it to that next level in their own time.
Yeah. Well, there's also the website. The website is still there, the manup.org.au, and there's heaps of information there as well that people could just read through at their own leisure, including some psychoeducational materials, and there's a page that has links to help-seeking organisations there. So that's, if someone didn't feel up to watching a whole documentary, there's that as well that could be sort of distributed to a broader audience, or for people to digest in their own time.
Great, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, along with any of the educational resources you've mentioned.
Yes, I will try to hunt them down. I'm not sure where they are. I'll do my best.
That's okay. Otherwise, there's also a few write-ups in various sort of in the APS and a few other things that I could link to, so people can kind of get an overview of what the research says and how it's been used.
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure if you're aware of that. Yeah, there's that Insight article, which is one of our co-investigators, Andrea Phelps, wrote, who's also a practitioner. So,
yeah, I'm just looking at it, going through it now.
About, that sort of implications for practice, which was a really good article.
Excellent. Any other tips for, I mean, we could have a whole conversation on masculinity and vulnerability and men's suicide, but I really wanted to just talk about the Man Up project specifically. But any kind of just general tips or words of wisdom for those working with men and talking about men's mental health that they can kind of take away and try and do a little bit differently?
I suppose I could just speak from my own perspective, and I think it's just that understanding that those masculine norms that we all thought kind of were long dead are kind of not, in fact, and those pressures to be self-reliant, to solve problems on your own and to not show emotional weakness, I think are still very much alive and kicking. But a lot of the participants, I think, in our study reported a strong desire to move away from that and to be more emotionally expressive, especially in the way that they raise children. There was a lot of comments about how men wanted to raise children in a world that was free of those pressures on both men and women. So, yeah, I think it's just to keep that probably in your mind, that that men probably are very willing to talk about things and want to be able to be emotionally expressive, but there's a lot of pressure to be otherwise. So, yeah, I think just to be mindful of that.
Great, thank you so much. So if people want to find out more, they can head to the manup.org.au website. They can access the documentary on ABC iView and Stan.
Yeah, I think you can get to it from the website too.
Okay, great.
And people can contact me directly by email if they like, if they have any questions about the evaluation.
I'll add your email onto that. Awesome. It was really nice chatting to you. I was so interested in the project, and I'm so glad that there's a lot of work being done around how do we integrate that in therapy, because it's still quite current. It's only a couple of years old and there's still a lot of people who haven't heard of it. So it's still kind of trickling through. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for your interest and for continuing to spread the word.
Thanks, Kylie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for today's episode's resources, and don't forget to click subscribe and review us wherever it is you get your podcast.